Hi, I'm Sean Alexander Allen, and we're at LudoNarraCon 2025, and I'm joined here with Zalavier Nelson Jr. and Adana Ned, and we're going to be talking about dark comedy, the art of writing real, relatable, and funny stories in games. So, one of the first things to do is I just want to go around and get everybody to introduce themselves and get them talking about how they got into writing in games. So, Adana?
Hi, my name is Adana Ned. I'm a games writer, narrative designer, and games researcher. I've previously worked on Spirit Swap, Lo-Fi Beats to Match 3-2, Kiss You, and Recommendation Dog. And I think I got into games writing. I was actually doing a lot of games research, studying how players of color interacted in online environments. And I realized I really hated writing research papers and learned that actually you can write for games as a job. So that's how I pivoted and got into games writing.
And my name is Zalavier Nelson Jr. I've worked on a little over 100 games in the last 9 years. You might know me from my studio, Strange Scaffold. We put out things like I Am Your Beast and Clickholding and An Airport for Aliens Currently Run by Dogs. And most recently, as of the time of this airing, Creepy Redneck Dinosaur Mansion 3, the survival horror Metroidvania you didn't know you needed. So finding
Yeah.
early that I didn't just care about the narrative of games, but I cared about how that narrative was delivered, how all the pieces of a game could come together to bring that story together, and also how narrative could be used as the secret weapon to help make a game ship on time so that developers can survive to keep making funny games. Really drew me to that space and has kept me here, even when the games industry has been on fire.
Yeah, and so me, I run my studio, New Challenger. I worked at Rockstar Games forever ago. Worked games retail for a while. I really wanted to. The only way in that I saw was games writing about games, and so I did a lot of writing. I've done creative writing my whole life though, and so after doing a lot of writing, game design writing to teach myself game design, I guess I started like really leaning into like I did comic books, and actually the first thing that I wanted to do was turn a comic into a game, and that's why I decided I wanted to do games. And yeah, I just saw and games like Ogre Battle, Final Fantasy, like I really love RPGs back in the day. And it's kind of interesting because the Super Nintendo actually had a lot of well written games. Even with a lot of the wacky translations, you also got some really good writing back in the day. So but that's what kind of brought me here. Something that I think about a lot is, there you go, like best writing in games, comedy in games is something that's, I think comedy in and of itself is very hard. So, like, one of the things that I always think about, like, why go into, like, more humorous stuff? Like, what drew you to that? Because, regular writing is like, sure, but actively trying to be funny in games is a whole other thing.
I think for me, comedy is the gateway to letting people feel, or even forcing them to feel, literally anything else. If you can get someone to laugh, you can make them cry, you can make them feel fear, you can make them feel hatred, you can bring them across the entire emotional spectrum, because comedy has a unique way of opening people to feeling everything else. So when I want to talk about how late stage capitalism is working as intended as it sets us all on fire, I don't do a story about being sad about late stage capitalism. I make Space Warlord Organ Trading Simulator with a group of really talented people. And as you laugh at, ha ha, insurance, you go, oh God, insurance. And that second beat, the fact that games through their systems even let you do so much satirical work and so much evocation of introspection in the player, because they go, oh man, maybe the reason my life is sucking in all of these other different ways is because of late stage capitalism. That's something that games and comedy in games is uniquely positioned to do. So I want to do it all the time, and I get sad whenever I see something not take that opportunity. By trying to be serious, by saying, oh, funny is the opposite of allowing thought to exist, they strangle out the conversation in the first place.
I think for me, writing like comedy in games, I think those are like some of the most standout moments that people remember and like enjoy from games because you're always going to remember a time you were like laughing at the screen. Like I know when Tears of the Kingdom came out and Nintendo made this really impressive physics system, and then everyone immediately like did like Geneva war crimes on the Koroks. Everyone remembers and laughs about that. And I think the other cool thing is when you laugh about a moment in games and see other people laughing about that same moment in games, that creates a really great moment of connection for people to really like start talking and like as Xavier said, like connect over like real world issues. Like man, it sure is funny like trying to get these Koroks from point A to point B, and maybe public infrastructure in Hyrule should be better for better public transportation. But just showing it as a way, and I think it's also a really good way to combat the like grim dark, everything has to be serious, everything has to be focused and sad and tragic with no good lighting, you know? Because I feel like games has a really cool way of having people experience and tell stories, and by showing comedy and different types of comedy, you can like open up the gates to showing, portraying different types of stories in games.
Yeah, it kind of brings me back to even just thinking about it's like I was trying to do this thing and I was writing about like I think I wrote about Vanquish and how Vanquish on Xbox 360 how it basically like took the piss out of Gears of War. Like it literally made like a Gears of War character be the brunt of all the jokes. And Gears of War is like a game where I feel nothing, right? It's so angry and explosive that it's like okay, to the point where like a sad emotional part happened and I started laughing because I was like this is so because it's so gamey and I was like they're trying to make me feel like this serious thing is like happening and I'm like yeah but like they're clipping through this thing, it's all kind of goofy, whereas Vanquish is like they have like the grizzled guy who's just yelling at the player the whole time, and the player character actually is like really fast and jumping over stuff and trying to be cool, and I don't know, I think it's like I just feel like that was like way more successful in a lot of different ways. And I think I don't know. For me, I think a big thing was yeah, like I back in the day, I used to make a lot of comics, and they were funny. And then when I became a teenager, they became angry. And I really love what Zalavier says about the about how if you can make someone laugh, you can make them feel anything. Because when I was starting to work on Treachery Beatdown City, I wanted to make people feel a certain way about like the characters, and it wouldn't make any sense for it to be anything but funny, because it's like the tragedy of being funny is better than like getting to laugh at and stuff like I think Get Out, like Key and Peele, like Jordan Peele just was like they were really good at making light of a lot of this stuff, and a lot of sketch comedies do that, and whereas like I don't know, they taught me essentially how that I could do that too, and I just thought I always feel very thankful for old Chappelle and all the other comedians who were really being able to talk about kind of serious problems and laugh at them. Just made me feel more seen in life. I feel like one of the things that's really core to comedy is the punchline. I've spent about a year or two like just hanging out in the comedy scene in New York, and they have a lot of open mics or a lot of shows where comedians would A/B test jokes or just completely bomb. Like even established comedians would bomb and need like an assist from another comedian to like get themselves out of that bombing situation. And that's the whole stand-up thing. But those folks typically then go on and write TV. They do all these things. But in games, we have no control over where the punchline happens. You don't have a control over how quickly the player presses the button, or if you have a running gag that's going to take place somewhere else in the world. Will they even go there at the time that you need them to, and then make them think about to the callback? So how do you typically deal with the punchline and its unpredictable nature in games?
You want to take this first, Adana?
Yeah, so in Spirit Swap, one of the things that we wrote is that as the player character bonds with other characters, other non-playable characters, after they get to a certain point, they like get a new gift. Or when they first meet them and the end of their class at like the pinnacle of their relationship, they get first they get a gift that boosts their skills, and then they get an upgraded version of that gift. And one of the characters who's really into mozzarella sticks, like they talk about it in like almost all their gift from you is an air fryer. And it was like something that was really out there, but I was like, they're a very serious, very composed character. So contrasting that with like something completely so like a portable air fryer that you just carry around. And I think one of the things is like leaving space in your games for like letting like as the player like approaches it, trying not to be too rigid on like, oh, this scene has to happen right after this scene in order for it to be funny. So it's like you have to like invest your jokes in different parts of the game, if that makes sense. Like other characters will say, oh, I'm going to go over to Hannon's house because we're going to make mozzarella sticks and like watch this concert or watch this like TV show. So it's something that's been mentioned to the player either offhand, whether they've noticed it or not. So players who have been paying attention are like, oh, this is funny. And players who haven't is like, oh, this is so random, but it's still funny. So it's like investing it in little places where it's like you can still see some of the build-up. Maybe more perceptive players see more of the build-up, but it's still a comedic ending, and that's like the punchline hitting, if that makes sense.
I think I saw somebody mentioning that on Blue Sky, like a screenshot of it. So that was like pretty cool.
I think that's also one area where I'd say that game developers, one of the infamous things that people say for like why comedy doesn't work with games, even when they want to get controversial, is, well, comedy is so hard, and that's why multiplayer games are the only place where comedy really works in games, because you don't have control over when and how a punchline is delivered. And I feel like as game designers, and I think Treachery and Beatdown City and the way you wrote dialogue is a great example of this, Sean. If you think of your game as a one-way box of storytelling, that is true. But if you think of your game as performance, we actually have a lot of levers we can pull to control where and how and what makes people laugh. In the same way that constructing a joke, you write it slightly differently, and it goes from being even, say, offensive to empowering and being a critique. This is where my least favorite genre, this is a slight tangent, but my least favorite genre of comedy in games is the parody game, because often they just do the thing that they're saying that they're parodying. And when you just do the thing and have made no further commentary, when you haven't flipped it at all, saying, isn't it weird that this is bad, and then doing the bad thing doesn't make it good. So in games, the way you structure text boxes is like you chop a line in half and suddenly you control where the punchline hits. If you think of your game as a performance to and with the player in that very active way that theater engages audience in a different way and would even make uncomfortable subject matter like Sweeney Todd into something that's comedic and that we're all opting into. In our game, in Airport for Aliens Killing Run by Dogs, you meet kind of a weird dog. And then that JPEG pulls out a realistic 3D gun pulled to the side. And the idea of not just... the idea of structuring that beat as an experiential one, as I meet this weird dog, he pulls a gun on me, I have dialogue options related to my feelings in that moment of discomfort. We extrapolate that theme further, and click holding, I think part of the reason it landed for people isn't that we just made a unsettling first-person clicker. It is that the way dialogue lines are written, the way that the sounds that dialogue lines make, especially when like they're really short, the things we ask players to do and the way the game reacts to them, all of it is happening in a deeply contextual, performative way. And that's what gives you the control over your punchline. And that's how I think both game design and writing can work together to do really effective comedy, is if you aren't full of yourself, if you are performing for the player and expecting that to be a conversation, you can have an extra long hallway that ends in a gag, and the gag isn't walking down hallways boring, but that they the player, by engaging with you, has gone on a little mini journey as part of their wider journey that resulted in something ridiculous. That's really funny. I think this is part of the reason From Software games do so well, is because they're actually really gosh dang funny. They are punchlines and performance and discussion, and that boss pulls out a second tendril when you didn't even know it had a first one, and all of those are designed not to let the developer just do whatever it's doing, but to elicit something from the player in a very active, comedic fashion.
Yeah, I feel like that's like the thing about online is you see people laughing when they die, and like from software games, and that's a good thing, right? Because then they want to go, as opposed to like raging because it was well, that's the thing, it's the unexpected, right? Like that's a big thing about comedy, is bringing out the unexpected. And yeah, like, yeah, there's a problem with parody where people think, oh yeah, like I'm making a parody and that's supposed to make it okay, and then people make just a parody trailer that's the same thing as, but using their game assets, and I'm like, sure, that's easy. But yeah, like trying to craft that thing, yeah, like I don't know, and I think a lot about what you talked about online about structure of your lines and making sure that the jokes fit in a screen shareable amount, which often I think comes back to even just like the best practice of not overwhelming players with a lot of text. Like, so if you have a text heavy game, still keeping the text. That's something I like about Spirit Swap also, is that it feels, it has speaking, but also like, even if I don't know why these days I've been having a hard time sitting with dialogue that's spoken, and I just kind of zoom through, but I still get the beats, and I still get, because there's little jumps of the characters, and there's things that are little moments that you will always get back to at some point. Or like, I actually rewrote a lot of Treachery Beatdown City's jokes because I got to the end of working on the game and I was like, this isn't funny. And I was like, there's no joke here. There's no this there. There was maybe just a lot of people yelling, but there wasn't any really resolve. And when I read that thing, I literally started restructuring things and saying, how do I make a joke fit? And something that was funny is my friend Josh, I think a lot of us know Josh, Intelligame, was playing Treachery Beatdown City, and then during a cutscene where Bruce goes on a tangent, Josh started talking about something else. And the next line when Josh decided to pick up the cutscene was Brad saying, like, what did that have to do with anything? And Josh started laughing hysterically because he felt called out by the game because he went on a tangent with the tangent. And I don't know, I felt very, I've just, I don't know, one of the best things is seeing people laugh at the thing. And so, I don't know, I think it is still a little hard to control where that hits, but the other thing is, like, I think the game design of it is really where it leads, right? It's like using games at their best as opposed to trying to shove it into somebody. I think.
Do you all think? Sorry to interrupt. I was just gonna say. Do you think that part of this is because comedy doesn't exist in a vacuum? Like, if you tell a joke in a forest, no one laughs. There is no way to tell that it's a killer joke until there's an audience there. If you're a clown, your entire purpose in clowning is to interact, and with no interaction, you aren't actually a good clown until you're supposed to audience. Do you think part of that is why comedy both works in games and can be really hard, is because it is all focused on a player who you actually don't see yet, don't know?
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the like hardest parts of like pinpointing, because you can have funny moments, but depending on like the player, they may think, "Oh, that's funny," or they're like, I'll keep going." And I actually want to like build up on your previous point, talking about like theater and different ways games can be looked at, because with Spirit Swap, when you have the way the dialogue scenes are set up, it's sort of like a visual novel. So you have the background, you have the character sprite, and then you have the text box. And most people just see, oh, this is a one-dimensional text box. But mentally, what I was seeing, it was like as a stage, because we had like different effects we could put on top of characters. Like if they were laughing, you could put like a laughing effect. If they were like attracted, you could put a heart effect. But I think one of the other fun things is just like not seeing it as something just static or something you can also play with. Because there's this one scene where Iskandar, one of the characters I wrote, gets attacked by a seagull trying to steal his donut. And while he's getting attacked by the seagull, we were like, well, we don't have a seagull sprite, but we can just shake his sprite around like he's getting attacked by a seagull. And that ended up being really, really funny. And I think one of the cool things about like games and the narrative and how that's all like interpreted is that you can like go as deep as you want to. Like we had one of the voice actors do voice lines for the seagull. We didn't have to do that. It just could have been like text, but yeah, we had someone like squawking into a mic, which was very funny. So I think that's also like a part of just taking the comedy seriously and showing like you're showing players that you're in this world. This is an experience that you should embrace, like all the funny parts, even though like Spirit Assault doesn't really have a lot of like dramatic parts, but both the funny parts and the dramatic parts as players experience both. I think that immerses them more and gets them more open to like experiencing stuff in your game.
Yeah, I think yeah, I mean, I don't know, it's like comedy is about just putting stuff on the line and not caring. If people like you do like work really hard on your joke, but there is the chance that the audience is gonna just not get it, right? So you have to do that in the game. I think that's really funny. That's actually a great affordance that games have. That's also like a play that you didn't have to have a seagull, but you can play a seagull sound off to the side, and people get it, right? They're like, the one thing I was just gonna say is one of the funniest moments in a game. Speaking of like punchlines, was playing Legend of the Mystical Ninja 64, and they added a laugh track to that game. And I remember reading reviews and people were like, why is there a laugh track? And I'm like, because it made the game very funny. Like, because there's a part where they say something like, I think they call Goemon, like, they call him Fernando for some reason. They just keep referring to him as Fernando. And then he just goes like, who's he calling Fernando? And then the other person turns to the camera and says, I think he was talking to you. And there's a laugh track right behind it that just, I was like 17 or whatever, and I just started laughing hysterically because it was like, I think without a laugh track, it would have felt flat, but because they added this weird element of television to it, which like TV is also like unreality, right? You're like talking into a screen. Basically, you know, the audience is a lot different than you know, movies where. So I don't know, that was just really hilarious to me. So I feel like you can just engineer sound effects, like that idea, like, or just puppeting stuff can help.
One of my favorite moments in El Paso Elsewhere is if you manage to find a secret in, like, you're fighting through the void, you enter a hall full of meat, it's not great, and if you manage to jump behind a few things, you open a door. And you have to find a key elsewhere to open this door. So it's presented in a similar way to other rewards and like treasure rooms we had throughout the game. And then it's just this really like dank, cold hall, and you start walking down it, and your footsteps are reverberating through the entire room. And there's a spotlight on a single radio at the end of the room. And at that point, using the language of games, you're expecting, okay, is there going to be a big like boss fight here? Did I step into an unexpected, really hard encounter? My health is not ready for this. I don't have any pill bottles left. And you click on that radio, and a narrator in deadpan says, clown music. And then it just starts playing clown music, and confetti pops off. And then that's it. And the room is just lit up, and you just walk back. And the idea of creating all the build-up for a gameplay beat that doesn't happen, instead having anticlimax and playing with expectation, that's all the levels of a game, including sound design, being used for comedy. Because there was at one point we considered, to your point, Sean, not having I think there's a literal laugh track there as well. We were like, let's not have a laugh track. What if we didn't have clown music, but every layer we added of sound specifically to amplify that moment made that walk back through the reverberating hall all the more funny, because you walked 50 steps to hear a guy say clown music, and then to hear.
Also, I mean, I thought one thing I was thinking about is just like adding the punchline at the end of a level that references something later, because it was like everybody talked about did I just see a fucking werewolf like at the bathroom part? Like that line in El Paso Elsewhere was just like something that a lot of people enjoyed.
A lot of that was recorded improv. So the idea of this is part of why El Paso Elsewhere was so hard to make, is we would make the cutscenes, and the cutscenes were getting made, and then we'd make levels, and then levels got a dialogue pass, which changed the levels, which changed the music, which would also sometimes change the dialogue pass. So there was a lot of cases where it would be 2 a.m. I'm playing through a level for the 15th time, and one of my favorite lines in that game is it comes from just a playthrough video I had done to review it and make suggestions for the team. There's a level filled with fire, and excuse my French, are we allowed to curse at LudoNarraCon?
No one said we can't.
Yeah, okay.
Just put a Mario coin noise over it, and then just put tariffs over. We'll be good.
Tariffs.
Tariffs. Okay, so hitting a wall, like already being really late into this playthrough, end of my workday, past the end of my workday, I open up a door, and the entire hallway, it goes from scenery filled with fire, and I'm like, oh, this is cool, this is really nice staging, to a hallway filled with fire, and just like 3 measly platforms that I have to get across all of that with a game not designed for platforming. And I said, what is this mother effing flame ass platforming bullshit? And that really landed, and that was a conversation and a punchline intended for the level designer, and that ended up being something we just recorded for the full game of your weary main character, so tired, such a awful relationship with his very hot ex, just at that moment seeing that hallway full of fire and saying, what is this fucking platform ass river fire bullshit? And that's still one of my favorite lines in the game.
Yeah, I wanted to build up on that a little, on how like comedy in games just isn't limited to like the dialogue and all the other things in the game. It's like, take like, how in Mario Kart 8 when you like pass a character and then they'll give you that like really dirty look, like the Luigi glare, like that was something. There's no dialogue, there's no noise to accompany it, but you can see it reflects the feeling of a character when you're like so close to the finish line and someone just passes you with a mushroom at the last second and you're pissed. So I think seeing other ways that you can like amplify the player's feelings, not just throughout dialogue or through voice acting, but even through the art and how characters react, is just another way you can display comedy in games.
Yeah, definitely. Although we are here to talk about writing,
no,
and that's actually kind of the interesting interplay here, is that right, like writing, we think. I mean, that's the thing. We often get told that the funniest part about games are things like that, like things like where the game goes off the rails, or like everybody was sharing the Luigi death stare for a while, cutting it to Ryan Dirty, doing all sorts of things, and yeah, that's basically just a confluence of systems creating something that is absolutely hysterical. And honestly, I think oftentimes more funny than a lot of people who try really hard at writing the comedy. But I do think that, I guess this is what part of this panel is like talk about like how we, we're working within that. So I think, like, that's one of those challenges, right? Because we're working with gameplay systems that could theoretically like work against us a little bit, like especially when you're trying to be serious and the game breaks and then it's like unintentionally funny. So I guess talking about like kind of like unintentional stuff, and things that you don't always have in control, and we're all writers. I know we've worked for ourselves. We've worked for other people. How do you deal with when you're trying to, like, I guess if someone has control and they're saying like, hey, I think this should go like this, and you find that their humor's just way too hacky, or they just seem to not be getting what you're laying down. How do you work with that?
I'd love to hear, especially Sean, from the story that you relayed about rewriting Treachery and Beatdown City. I'd love to hear about how that transformation ended up working for you, and how you knew that it was effective. Was it just going off of your own internal barometer of funny?
I so my wife is very Midwestern, and I'm very New York, and so like I feel like that's the yin and yang of comedy. Also, she like loves Monty Python stuff, and like I think I fell asleep watching. We went to a thing with John Cleese, right? Cleese, yeah. Like talking about it, but like while I forgot which movie it was, but during it, like I was like, I don't know, I just fell asleep, and I was like, it wasn't hitting for me. So again, we have very different sensibilities, although we both watched the movie Snatch a lot, so then we have that to rely on. But yeah, so it's like we have all these like things that come back, and so I would actually share the writing with people in the small circle. It was basically the writer. I mean, not the writer, the programmer, Manny. Because we work so closely. So whenever, and we'd be in a cafe, and I'd start laughing to myself, and I'd share it and see what his reaction was. And then a lot of the times I would bring this back to my wife and see what her reaction was. And, sometimes the joke just didn't hit with her at all. And I was like, and I'm going through this anyway, because also maybe Manny laughed at it a lot, and us having New York humor, it's a little different. But like, we made a cutscene where, like, I remember Brick the biker. Like, we didn't introduce him at all. We didn't do anything the first time. He just started yelling at the team, and you don't learn about stuff. And it was like stuff I knew in my head, but I hadn't hadn't showed the game. And when I rewrote it, I had this concept of what if the biker gang was a tech company and they were post biker ganging because it was just not a thing anymore. So that they were going to make an app that was like kind of like Fiverr, but for like smuggling drugs and stuff like that. And that was their real evil, was that they were going to become a tech company. And because it was more acceptable. But then I made Brick, who's like an older white guy wearing an American bandana and a big white beard, big burly white beard. Made him like really racist, as especially because like the Hell's Angels were known to be like a kind of racist like cult like biker gang. So we were actually basing this on like real biker gang stuff, and be like, what if that guy had to be the HR? And so he calls Bruce, like, who's literally like a financial like whiz kid, like a thug. And he's like, I'm a thug? Like, you're a biker. That's like the pot calling the kettle black. And then he's like, whoa, we don't talk about race here. Like, we were trying to be. And I was also imagining like the HR departments I was in and how it was like dealing with them. And it just kept going back and forth. And just like the idea of like a HR biker made my wife laugh so hard that I just kept leaning into it. And basically that's where the tech company, the tech biker gang was born. And then that actually folded in as like more of like that they were hired to do a job that was basically to distract the player. So it actually grew more to be more of a narrative theme. But yeah, like working by yourself, you can often just not see the forest for the trees. Like, it'd just be like, what requires a lot of rewrites and stuff. But I know both y'all got your own experiences. I know you, Zalavier, have I don't know how much you could talk about certain things, but you've had issues where people are just like, oh, we're going to change something, which changes all the writing, or...
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, that a lot of the writing is not just working with the player's context like streamers. Streamers can be locked in and really engaging with your game, but if you're also making a streamable game, part of what you have to think about and might cause you agony as a writer is, I have to write lines that work even if someone isn't giving their full attention. Or you say, you know what, this person will never get the joke, and you're making a lot of decisions. I think comedy is making decisions all of the time. And my observation that you do touched on is that sometimes those decisions are impacted inside the house as well. Someone changes a piece of the game such that it changes the context of your line, and you're like, okay, that's a line I got to rewrite because this is no longer funny. You're referencing a seagull who actually we didn't end up recording a voice lines for that seagull. So, and there's no character model either. So, and there's no shaking. So you can't reference that seagull because there's nothing to support the punchline. I've been hit with that on several projects. I think one of my favorite examples of that going right, though, is on Hypnospace Outlaw, where I was a narrative lead, we were like 11th hour. 2 days before the game comes out, Jay Tholen pops into my DMs. He's a creative director and says, oh my gosh, everyone's going to think we're awful. We've made this entire 90s internet. It has like several prog rock albums, but there's no examples of rap and hip hop culture. Everyone's going to think we're racist. This is so bad. What do we do? And I said, hang on a second. Give me an hour. And in a half an hour, I had brought back 3 different raps. One about a buffet heist, making friends with like waiters at a resort so that you can go in and get all the food for free. The second one about a bunch of people talking about we're like going to a party. And everyone's talking about all the cool things they're going to do at the party, but all of them end up being so tired they don't end up going to the party at all. And one last one about, I think the ending line of the chorus was, know when you get blazed up that you're doing it with Marx's love. So it was about like, I think weed is a communist drug. Yeah, Mary Jane is a socialist stimulant. So it was talking about how making a connection between a very pro-communism, pro-weed rap. That one didn't make it into the final game, but the first 2 did. And Jay told me that he would take those raps and the very, very horrible temp recording I'd done of them, and he would get someone to do actual versions of those raps with those references and really quickly pull together just something in the 11th hour to make these happen. Launch day comes. I've been watching a streamer for 10 hours play our game. I'm so excited. I feel internally satisfied. People are getting the jokes. They're getting the world. They're digging into what we are laying down. But then he enters the final stage of the game where no spoilers, the world opens up significantly. And he finds the page with raps. And I was like, oh, cool. I get to hear what the rap artist did. And it turns out Jay, just because of launch fatigue and all the other things that had to get done, hadn't hired anyone at all. He put in my acapella laptop mic recording, even more bit crushed, just straight into the game. And the streamer, after 10 hours of playing Hypnospace Outlaw, said, I can't do this, and just muted the game for most of the rest of his playthrough, the last like hour or so. And in that moment, I was hit with simultaneously, that's the biggest punchline of all time on me, but also there's a degree to which that is much funnier for players and really sings as just the unfiltered sincerity of the 90s internet. So, yeah, sometimes I do write, and with that experience, among many, many others, I will sometimes write or record something with the knowledge or intention, communicate to the rest of the team of, hey, if we can't end up doing this, this line will still work in this way, or I'll do this thing, or there's a really cheap way we can still pull off this version if it's something that the entire team is around, even if other things pop up. And that's where I think comedy and production are oddly enough really positive bedfellows, because when you're thinking of comedy, when you're thinking of subverting expectations, gosh, that works really well with finding solutions to how do we get in this punchline or this joke when we don't have a budget for sound designers anymore.
Yeah. Donna, because
Yeah.
we talked a lot.
For me, I think building up on what you said, Sean, with just like trying out jokes with other people, other members of the team, even people who are like unrelated. Like I know I bounced a lot of some of the spirit swap jokes on my sister because one of the other things about like writing comedy in games is you want to make sure, as funny as it is to like put in like relevant memes, by the time the game comes out, that might be like something completely in the past. Because I know for Kiss You, one of the running jokes we wanted to have, I think, was there was like this Van Diesel elf who was like talking about family on campus, which was really funny at first, but then like as like the development time went on, we're like, okay, for the audience that's playing this game, and the audience of playing this game and the audience of people that are really into Fast and Furious and the audience of people that are going to remember this meme is like a minuscule circle. So it was like mostly figuring out and maybe turning into like this one really jock like frat boy elf that's like always everywhere and like giving out tutorials because that fit the narrative better and was also more like flexible. So even if you're like unfamiliar, if you're like playing a college game, you know there's going to be jocks running around. So it was something that fit the time period of the game and would also still fit by the time the game released, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, we've been talking for a bit. I feel like one thing just throw out and ask about before we wrap up is, has there ever been something that you're like, okay, I talked to people about this, I pitched it, blah, 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 and then at the end, the decision maker, even if it's you, just said, actually, that doesn't work at all, and had to go because of one reason or another. Either.
Yeah, I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also like mentally going through all the spirit swap. Like,
Yeah.
I definitely want to pitch a lot of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure references, just because of like how bizarre and just out there it is, and how spirit swap is also out there because every once in a while there's like all these spirits running in and you have to like clear them in order to fix everything. I was able to get like one or two, but I definitely was like putting in too many where it felt more draining than funny. So like finding a way to like balance, like, oh, that's one JoJo's reference, that's actually really funny. But once you get to like the fifth or sixth one, you're like, man, this writer's really into JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Someone should get her a therapist or something like that. So just finding different ways to like balance. And also like we did with like the seagull, because we didn't have a seagull sprite, but we were like, we could still like have a real person. We could like find like loyalty-free seagull sounds on the internet, or we could just like ask one of the voice actors to like make actual seagull sounds, which we thought would be way funnier in execution, because yeah, you expect to hear like a seagull squawking, but a person impersonating a seagull is even funnier.
I've had jokes that didn't work because they didn't have setup or punchline, or either setup or payoff, to your example, Sean. So that's certainly been a part of my journey, but I think one of the bigger ones and one of the more consistent experiences is humor gets really weird when you work in licensed worlds, because you're looking for how you deliver a joke that's humorous in the world of the thing, deliver a joke that's potentially humorous on a meta level of someone experiencing this, or just for the team, what you would like to see in this world or think might be funny. And then you have to think about all of that in the context of, okay, but what are we actually going to be allowed to do? So I know South Park Snow Day in particular, which I did quite a bit of writing on, was such an interesting balance there. And pretty much every game that I've done, especially in the licensed territory, had some amount of humor. And gosh, let me tell you, writing a joke is one thing. Designing a joke with a team is one thing. Writing a joke knowing that you have to either deliver the initial joke or deliver an explanation along with a joke that works for an executive to look over and approve or disapprove totally changes the process. So there's definitely some things I wrote for South Park that did not make it into that final game. And I wouldn't even say that's for like the worst either. It's just you're working in the constraints of a world and also what one or another approving entity has to approve. So I'm surprised with how much we got away with on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tactical Takedown. They let us really go ham in that universe and deliver some punchlines that I was afraid we'd be shoved into corny one-liner territory. They let us actually take our own spin on the world and run with it. So I was really happy that we got to embed the jokes and make them naturalistic. And on things like South Park, where you have to go through Matt and Trey and the people in front of Matt and Trey, and also it has to be approved by all sorts of other entities, also your own boss. That one was probably the hardest process, but some of my best writing, I think, came from being forced to go through that crucible, and what joke survives that, and nailing writing something that works for all the entities involved was really satisfying. I don't know if my joke about a Suicide 69 made it in, but I definitely know I wrote it. Because, you know, one person has a gun, the other person has a gun, and they position themselves. Oh. South Park.
Yeah, actually, I had to do a lot of... I haven't really written for anyone else's game, which has been the challenge of even just trying to pitch, because I made a game that was so me that, like, I don't know how to even, like... And, like, everybody's like, we're hiring a writer for a cozy game, and it's like, here's my jokes about racism and vegan dog clothes, where like
see, that's the great thing about writing. Sometimes you just say a thing and it's funny, and like vegan dog clothes, I'm in.
Yeah, that was like the cutscene that talked about a confluence of was it idiocy? I forgot. Like, it was like of ignorance and something, and it was like basically like when protesters protested a vegan dog fashion show because they thought that the clothes were made of dogs and not for dogs, and that was like the tangential thing. But
Donna,
I feel like for me, huh?
Oh, sorry. I thought you were wrapping up your point. My apologies.
Oh yeah. But yeah, I think a good thing to say there is that, like, constraints are good. I think, you know, one of the most important things about writing comedy is actually working with other people one way or another. When I see like a lot of solo dev stuff, again, not to dig on solo devs, but I think comedy is not like comedians don't do comedy by themselves. They get in front of a crowd and often work for 2 years at that stuff before doing a special, right? Like, or when you're writing a show, you have a room. So it's like the best way to think about this stuff is that, like, writing comedy, you're in concert with an audience of some sort, and it's best to try to work with as many people as possible, even if they're not hired writers, they're your friends, they're your family, they're people that are different than you, so that you don't accidentally write like some of the most like terrible one note, 5 years too late, whatever. But I feel like that's what everybody's stories, and I think my experience basically has been as well. Yeah, do you want to make one more point before we head out, Salver?
No, I was saying I was pointing the thing to Adana because I don't think Adana got to answer the question.
Yeah, so for me, yeah. I think actually, Sean, I think I have like the inverse problem where, because I've worked on so many cozy games now, whenever I try to apply everything else, we're like, well, do you have like, I was like, writing is writing, and even though if you are a good writer, you should be able to like adapt to genres, especially with like comedy, because it's like the genre shouldn't be like such like a hard hurdle to pass for in comedy, like, or just with writing with games in general, because it's like, oh my goodness, I'm rambling off topic, my brain is fried. But the main point is that, like, the original question that you were saying was like besides bouncing comedy off of others, was just like how, like, it was like how, because the previous question was, I'm sorry, my brain's fried. Can you repeat the question, Sean? I'm so sorry.
Well, it's like, have you had just something that couldn't get past, like, the person who was the decision maker, even if it was you. Like if you were like, I thought this is funny, but then it just failed to make it in.
Yeah, that was what I mentioned with the JoJo stuff
Yeah.
and just like figuring out a way
Yeah,
to like bounce
yeah.
it up. Yeah,
That's what I
yeah,
thought. You did come
yeah.
in
Because
first.
I
actually,
thought
on that.
we
Yeah.
did
Okay.
something different after. It's fine. It's fine.
No, yeah.
Sorry,
Um,
just making sure.
No problem.
Yeah, yeah.
No problem.
No, I'm pretty sure I'm keeping the tally. Yeah, because that's the one thing I never want people to not talk. I mean, to that point, yeah, it's like I think one of the problems actually with kids games these days and kids TV having a 5-year-old is that Muppet Babies, or even Muppet Babies rather, like if you look at Muppet Babies back in the day, like it was aggressive and kind of upset sometimes. And like Muppet Babies now is like, hey, we're all friends all the time. And Sesame Street, when Jim Henson was making it, like the monsters would troll each other. It'd be
Fraggles
like,
are funny. If you ever
Kermit-
saw Fraggle Rock,
Kermit would get upset
Kermit would
all
have
the time
full
with the Muppets
crash
because the
outs
Muppets were
all
just
the time.
being dumb. Like he would just be like, "Come on, man! I'm asking you to rhyme with Jack and Jill went up the what?" And they're like, the side of the building, and he's like, "That doesn't rhyme," and he'd just start getting really angry. And that's how like I feel like kids learned at one point, and now like like to your point, like when people are trying to hire writers, like whenever I see like the cozy thing, I'm like, I mean, sure, but like you don't want it to just read like happy horseshit, basically, right? Like you want it to have like an emotion. Again, if you know comedy, you know dark comedy, you know how to poke fun without punching down, right? Like that's like a big skill that we all have to have. Like you've worked, like Spirit Swap is an amazing game because it has all these different types of people. And you have to make them all work together and make jokes about each other and then reveal it's like deeper than a lot of things. So it's like
ensemble casts. This is where I'll say ensemble casts are hellish in games. I keep getting pulled into writing ensemble casts, and they're so tough, which is why I respect so much what Adana did in Spirit Swap.
So-
what you did in Treachery.
Yeah, I wanted to actually like pop in like before we run out of time, but like I think one of my favorite things when approaching ensemble cast in games is doing what I like to call like the sitcom role, where it's like each character should have like one thing they have in common with other characters in the class and one thing they extremely disagree about, whether it's like their opinion on like pineapples on pizza or something. They should have one avenue they get along and one avenue they don't get along. So when any of these avenues are brought up whenever they're interacting, it can lead to like different comedic situations. Like if you take like two very different characters like Iskandar and Leon, it's like, oh, we have to deliver this stand mixer to our friend, but it's not fitting. So Iskandar's like, I'm gonna launch this out of a catapult, and Leon's like, absolutely not. That's not gonna work. So finding different ways of how like character chemistry works, I think, is especially important with ensemble casts and just comedy in games, because it opens up so many different ways the characters and the players and characters can interact.
I think that's a perfect place to stop. I'm Sean Alexander Allen. I'm Sean AA SHAWN, the word double and A. Most places, Beatdown City is what I work on. New Challenger with a U instead of EW. Where can people find y'all?
I am
I'm
AF. Oh, sorry.
After
I
you.
was I'm AF Narratives 8 on the Bird site, if it still exists and is not like exploded by now, but I'm AF Narratives, which is AF, then word narratives on most everywhere else, and I worked on Spirit Swap, which you can get on Xbox and Steam right now.
I'm Zal Nelson Jr. You can find me at Rit Nelson, WRIT Nelson, a bunch of places, if you still want to hear me talk after all this. And we just released Creepy Redneck Dinosaur Mansion 3, which is a comedic meta commentary on the state of games, as well as a loving homage to things like Resident Evil. You can hork a book in it, and I've been looking for several years for the opportunity to write the word hork into a game script, and I finally pulled it off. So if you want to hork a book, if you want to hork it all, if you want to get horkspiration, Creepy Redneck Dinosaur Mansion 3 on launch discount as part of LudoNarraCon right now.
Word. And yeah, I guess this just says like writing's hard. And so, make sure to find good groups of writers and don't try to do it all yourself. Thank you for being here.